The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey as security teams completed their final checks. Inside the historic building, centuries of tradition seemed to whisper through the vaulted ceilings. Today would mark another chapter in the long history of royal ceremonies. But this time, the world's attention focused not just on protocol and pageantry, but on a family that had captured hearts across the globe. Outside the Abbey, thousands of people lined the streets, their faces bright with anticipation. Some had camped overnight, wrapped in blankets decorated with flags. Others had traveled from distant countries, determined to witness this moment in person. The crowd represented dozens of nations, speaking countless languages, yet they all shared one common purpose. They wanted to see the family that had somehow managed to bridge the gap between ancient monarchy and modern life. Catherine checked her reflection. One final time in the private room set aside for the family, her dress had been chosen with meticulous care, elegant yet appropriate. Striking the delicate balance between royal dignity and maternal warmth, she smoothed the fabric, then turned her attention to what truly mattered. George stood beside her, his small shoulders squared beneath his formal jacket. Charlotte fidgeted with her dress, and Louis gazed around the room with wide, curious eyes. William entered, his presence immediately calming the nervous energy that had built in the room. He had walked this path countless times, had attended ceremonies at Westminster Abbey since childhood. Yet today felt different. Today, he wasn't just a prince fulfilling his duty. He was a father, guiding his children through an experience that would become part of their earliest memories of public life. "Everyone ready?" William asked, his voice carrying the gentle tone he reserved for family moments. George nodded seriously, understanding the importance of the occasion even at his young age. Charlotte looked up at her mother, seeking reassurance. Catherine knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with her daughter, speaking words only Charlotte could hear. Whatever she said worked magic, because Charlotte's uncertain expression transformed into a confident smile. Louis, still too young to fully grasp the significance of the day, reached up to hold his father's hand. William lifted him easily, settling the boy on his hip in a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary. Here was a future king dressed in formal attire, about to enter one of the world's most famous churches. Carrying his youngest child like any father might, the family gathered together for a brief moment of privacy before the doors would open. No cameras captured this scene. No reporters documented their words. This was their time, a small island of normalcy before they stepped into the glare of public scrutiny. Catherine reached out, adjusting George's collar, then Charlotte's hair. William set Louis down, straightening his own jacket. "Remember what we talked about?" Catherine said softly to the children. "Stay together, walk slowly, and if you need anything, Mummy and Daddy are right beside you." An aide appeared at the door, giving a discreet nod. The time had come. Catherine and William exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words. They had faced countless public appearances together, had weathered storms of media attention, had learned to navigate the impossible demands of royal life. But introducing their children to this world required a different kind of courage. The doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with officials, each one bowing or curtsying as the family passed. George walked between his parents, his gait careful and measured. Charlotte held her mother's hand, her earlier nervousness replaced by curiosity as she observed the grandeur surrounding them. Louis gripped his father's hand tightly, his small legs working to keep pace. As they moved through the Abbey's interior, the magnitude of the building seemed to dwarf them all. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the stone floor. The air felt cool and heavy with history. Every footstep echoed a reminder that countless monarchs, princes, and princesses had walked this same path over hundreds of years. The family reached the final corridor before the main entrance. Beyond those doors, the Abbey would be filled with dignitaries, guests, and representatives from around the world. Cameras would capture every moment, broadcasting their entrance to millions watching at home. The children would take their first real steps into public royal life. William looked down at his children, then at Catherine. She gave him that small, knowing smile that had sustained him through countless challenges. Together, they had built something remarkable within the constraints of royal duty, a real family. It's grounded in love and mutual support. Now, they were about to share that family with the world. The great doors of Westminster Abbey began to swing open, and the sound of hushed anticipation rolled toward them like a wave. Catherine straightened, her posture transforming from mother to duchess in a single breath, though her hand never released Charlotte's. William's bearing shifted too, shoulders back, chin level, every inch the prince he had been trained to be since birth. Yet his hand remained firmly clasped around George's. This was the moment everything changed. The moment the family stepped from private preparation into public view. The moment they showed the world what they had carefully nurtured behind palace walls: unity, grace, and genuine love. The Abbey awaited, hushed and magnificent, ready to witness something that transcended ceremony and protocol. The family took their first step forward together, moving as one unit toward whatever lay ahead. The cameras would capture their clothes, their expressions, their every gesture. But what they couldn't fully capture was the invisible thread that bound this family together, stronger than any royal tradition, more enduring than any ancient ceremony. Westminster Abbey had witnessed centuries of history, but today it would witness something equally powerful, a family choosing to face the world together, with grace, unity, and unshakable love. The first thing that struck everyone as the family emerged was the complete naturalness of the scene. Catherine moved with practiced elegance, but her attention remained divided, constantly aware of Charlotte beside her. The little girl walked with remarkable composure for her age, occasionally glancing up at her mother for reassurance. Each time she did, Catherine offered a gentle squeeze of her hand or a soft smile that seemed to say everything would be fine. George walked with careful dignity between his parents, his young face serious as he absorbed the magnitude of the moment. He had been preparing for this kind of public appearance his entire short life, yet no amount of training could fully prepare a child for the reality of hundreds of eyes watching his every move. Still, he held his composure, his steps measured and deliberate. William kept Louis close, his protective instinct evident in the way he positioned himself to shield his youngest from the overwhelming attention. Louis, blessedly unaware of the scrutiny, simply focused on staying close to his father, his small hand gripping William's jacket for security. The boy's innocence provided a touching contrast to the formal grandeur of the setting. The congregation rose as one, sound like a great wind moving through the ancient building. Faces turned toward the family, some openly emotional at the sight of the young children. This was what people had longed to see, the next generation of royals not as distant figures of protocol, but as real children experiencing something extraordinary with their parents' support. As they processed down the aisle, Catherine noticed Charlotte beginning to look overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. Without breaking stride or disrupting the solemnity of the moment, she leaned down slightly, whispering something in her daughter's ear. Whatever she said worked its magic immediately. Charlotte's shoulders relaxed, and she straightened her spine, a miniature reflection of her mother's poise. The Abbey's architecture created natural stopping points along their route, places where light fell in particular ways, or where historic monuments demanded acknowledgement. At each pause, the family remained connected, a small unit of 5 moving through space designed for ceremony and ritual. Their unity transformed what could have been a stiff, formal procession into something far more human and touching. Guests seated in the front pews could see details invisible to those farther back or watching on television. They noticed how William occasionally looked down at George, checking in without words. They saw Catherine's thumb gently stroking the back of Charlotte's hand in a soothing rhythm. They observed Louis leaning against his father's leg during one brief pause. Seeking comfort in the familiar, the family's clothing choices had been dissected by media for days leading up to this event. But seeing them in person revealed choices that transcended fashion. Catherine's dress complemented without overwhelming, sophisticated, yet understated. The children wore outfits appropriate to their ages, formal enough to respect the occasion, but practical enough for young bodies that needed to move and breathe. Halfway down the aisle, a small incident occurred that would later be replayed countless times on news broadcasts worldwide. Charlotte's shoe caught slightly on her dress hem, causing a tiny stumble. In an instant, Catherine's hand steadied her daughter. William shifted to provide additional support, and George reached out instinctively toward his sister. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but it revealed everything about the family's bond. Charlotte recovered immediately, her face showing brief surprise before settling back into composure. Catherine smoothed her daughter's hair with one gentle motion, then continued forward as if nothing had happened. The incident, rather than being embarrassing, somehow made the entire family more relatable. They weren't perfect automatons performing for cameras. They were a real family navigating a challenging situation together. The procession continued, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the Abbey. Centuries of history surrounded them, literally carved into the stone walls and memorials. Kings and queens had been crowned here, married here, mourned here. The weight of that tradition pressed down on everything, yet the family seemed to carry it lightly. Supported by their connection to each other, Louis grew tired, his small legs struggling with the slow, measured pace required by ceremonial occasions. Without hesitation or concern for optics, William simply lifted him, settling his son comfortably against his shoulder. The boy's head drooped, resting against his father's neck. Seeking the comfort of familiar warmth and scent, even in this overwhelming environment, photographers captured the moment. But what made it remarkable wasn't the visual itself. It was what it represented. A willingness to prioritize a child's need over rigid protocol. Yes, this was Westminster Abbey. Yes, this was a formal royal occasion. But a tired little boy still needed his father's comfort, and that need took precedence over any concern about maintaining a perfect image. Catherine noticed a slight adjustment in the procession timing ahead, likely to accommodate Louis's fatigue. She caught the eye of one of the officials and gave an almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. These small human considerations, invisible to most observers, were what made the difference between a grueling ordeal and a manageable experience for young children. George, meanwhile, had grown more confident as they progressed. His initial nervousness had transformed into something else, curiosity and growing pride in his ability to fulfill this role. He walked taller, his gaze occasionally sweeping across the congregation with something approaching his father's princely bearing. Yet when he looked back at his parents, he was simply a boy seeking approval, which he received in their proud smiles. The family approached the final section of their walk, where they would take their designated places. The entire journey down the aisle had taken perhaps 10 minutes. But in those minutes, they had given the world something precious. Not a performance, not a carefully staged photo opportunity, but genuine grace under pressure. They had shown what it meant to support each other, to prioritize family bonds, even within the strictures of royal duty, as they neared their destination. Catherine took a moment to glance at each of her children. George, walking tall and proud. Charlotte recovered from her stumble and radiating quiet confidence. Louis, peaceful against his father's shoulder, trusting completely in his parents' protection. Her heart swelled with pride and love so fierce it almost hurt. William met her eyes, and in that shared look, they acknowledged what they had accomplished together. They had brought their children through this challenge with dignity intact and spirits unbroken. More importantly, they had demonstrated to the world that being royal didn't require sacrificing being human. It was possible to honor tradition while also honoring the needs of children. It was possible to serve crown and country while also serving one's family with love and devotion. The moment the family reached their designated positions, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. The formal procession had concluded, but now came the challenge of maintaining composure throughout an extended ceremony. For adults, this meant patience and focus. For children, it meant testing the limits of their young stamina and concentration. Catherine settled into her seat with Charlotte beside her, maintaining that vital physical connection. She knew from experience that her daughter would need occasional reminders and reassurance as the ceremony progressed. George took his position, sitting straight-backed in conscious imitation of his father. Even at his young age, he understood the importance of setting an example. Though the weight of that responsibility sometimes seemed almost visible on his small shoulders, William kept Louis on his lap, recognizing that attempting to have the boy sit independently would be both unrealistic and potentially disruptive. Louis nestled against his father's chest, his earlier fatigue evident in the way he moved. The long walk had taken its toll on the youngest family member, yet he remained remarkably calm. Finding security in his father's steady presence, the ceremony began with music that filled the ancient abbey. Centuries of acoustic perfection, carrying each note to every corner of the vast space. Charlotte's eyes widened at the sound, her attention captured by the magnificent organ and choir. Catherine noticed her daughter's fascination and leaned close, whispering something that made Charlotte nod with understanding and renewed interest. George watched the proceedings with intense focus, trying to follow protocols he had been taught. When to stand, when to sit, when to bow his head. The complexity of royal ceremony demanded attention even from those born to it. Occasionally he glanced at his father, checking his own behavior against William's example. Learning through observation as much as instruction, the service progressed through its various elements, each one carrying deep significance and tradition. Speakers approached the lectern, their voices echoing through the space with practiced solemnity. Prayers were offered, hymns sung, rituals observed. Throughout it all, the family remained a unit of quiet dignity. Though the effort required to maintain that dignity with 3 young children shouldn't be underestimated. Louis began to grow restless, as any young child would during an extended period of required stillness. His small body squirmed slightly, seeking more comfortable positions. William adjusted his hold, providing new support that satisfied his son's need for movement without causing disruption. The prince's experience as a father showed clearly in these subtle accommodations, finding ways to meet his child's needs while maintaining the decorum demanded by the occasion. Charlotte leaned against her mother's side, her earlier confidence giving way to tiredness. Catherine's arm came around her daughter's shoulders, providing both physical support and emotional comfort. She stroked Charlotte's hair gently, a soothing gesture that required no words. The little girl's eyes drooped slightly, and opened again as she fought to stay alert and engaged. Midway through the ceremony, a particularly beautiful hymn filled the abbey, the kind of music that transcends religious boundaries and speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit. George's expression softened as he listened, momentarily forgetting the pressure of performance. For those few minutes, he was simply a child experiencing something beautiful, and that transformation was itself beautiful to witness. The family's behavior during this extended ceremony revealed much about their daily lives. Together, the ease with which Catherine comforted Charlotte suggested countless similar moments at home. A mother soothing her daughter during challenging times. William's natural handling of Louis's restlessness spoke to a father deeply involved in his children's daily care, not a distant figure who only appeared for formal occasions. Around them, other attendees watched with varying degrees of attention. Some focused intently on the ceremony itself. Others found their gaze drawn repeatedly to the young family, fascinated by this glimpse into their lives. Cameras positioned at discreet angles captured moments that would later be analyzed, celebrated, and shared millions of times across social media and news outlets worldwide. George shifted in his seat, his young body protesting the prolonged stillness. William noticed immediately, catching his son's eye and giving a barely perceptible nod of encouragement. The small gesture contained volumes, acknowledgement of the difficulty, pride in George's effort, assurance that the end would come eventually. George straightened slightly. Drawing on his father's strength to maintain his own composure, a reading began, the speaker's voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics of the abbey. Catherine helped Charlotte find the relevant page in the program, pointing to the words and whispering explanations that helped her daughter follow along. This gentle teaching, done so naturally within the formal setting, showed how the family worked to make even ceremonial occasions educational experiences for their children. Louis had grown heavier against William's chest, his fight against sleep gradually being lost. His father held him securely, making no attempt to wake him. There would be no scolding for a tired little boy, no insistence that he remain alert when his body demanded rest. The message was clear. Their children's well-being took priority over any concern about appearances, the ceremony reached a particularly significant moment, one requiring everyone's standing participation. Catherine gently roused Charlotte, helping her daughter to her feet with patient encouragement. George stood promptly, ready to participate fully. William rose smoothly, despite holding Louis, the boy stirring slightly but not waking, his small arms tightening around his father's neck. Standing together, the family presented a powerful image. Catherine's elegance, William's steady strength, George's determined dignity. Charlotte's tired but persistent effort, and Louis's innocent surrender to sleep. Each member contributing their own note to the family's harmony, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The hymn that followed invited full congregational participation. Hundreds of voices joining in words that had been sung in this space for generations. Catherine sang softly, her voice blending with thousands of others. George attempted to follow along, his young voice uncertain but earnest. Charlotte leaned against her mother, mouthing some words while remaining quiet, as the hymn concluded and the congregation returned to their seats. Catherine took a moment to check on each of her children. A gentle touch for Charlotte, a proud look for George, a soft adjustment of Louis's position in William's arms. These small maternal gestures, performed almost unconsciously, revealed the constant vigilance required to support 3 young children through such a demanding experience. The ceremony continued its stately progression through time-honored rituals. Blessings were given, commemorations made, traditions observed. The family remained present and engaged, though the effort required became increasingly apparent as fatigue set in. Yet they persevered, united in their commitment to seeing this through together, supporting each other through every challenging moment that remained. The ceremony entered its final third, a point where even adults struggled to maintain complete focus. For the children, this represented the true test of their endurance and training. George's earlier confidence had given way to visible fatigue, though he fought valiantly to maintain his composure. His small body, held rigid for so long, occasionally sagged before he caught himself and straightened again. Charlotte had progressed beyond tired into dangerous territory where children become unpredictable. She might remain calm, or she might suddenly become emotional. Catherine recognized the signs from countless experiences, adjusting her support accordingly. Her hand remained on her daughter's back, a constant reassuring presence that communicated safety and understanding without words. Louis slept peacefully now, his breathing deep, and even against William's shoulder, the prince held his youngest son with practiced ease, his arms never wavering despite the prolonged wait. Occasionally he would press a gentle kiss to Louis's head, an unconscious gesture of affection that cameras captured but could never fully convey the tenderness behind it. An unexpected moment occurred when Charlotte suddenly whispered something urgent to her mother. Catherine leaned in, listening carefully, then discreetly signaled to a nearby aide. Within moments, arrangements were being made to address whatever need Charlotte had communicated. The entire exchange took perhaps 30 seconds, handled with such smoothness that most attendees never noticed anything amiss. William caught Catherine's eye across their children. A silent question about Charlotte's situation. Catherine gave a small nod, indicating everything was under control. This wordless communication, perfected over years of marriage and partnership, allowed them to coordinate their responses to any situation without ever breaking the ceremony's decorum. George, meanwhile, had discovered that shifting his weight slightly from one side to the other provided relief from the discomfort of sitting still. He moved subtly, trying not to draw attention, but his father noticed. Rather than correcting him, William simply adjusted his own position in a similar way. Modeling for his son that even adults need to find small comforts during lengthy formal occasions, the speaker at the lectern delivered remarks about service, duty, and the importance of family in supporting those who serve. The words seemed particularly relevant given the young family sitting in the front row, literally embodying the message being delivered. Catherine and William listened attentively, though their primary focus remained split between the ceremony and their children's needs. A musical interlude provided welcome relief. The change in activity giving everyone permission to shift positions and resettle. Charlotte perked up slightly, her attention captured by the beautiful voices of the choir. George took the opportunity to stretch discreetly, rolling his shoulders in a movement that suggested his mother had taught him. This technique for managing physical discomfort during long events. William checked his watch subtly, calculating how much longer the ceremony would continue. Not out of impatience, but from a father's need to prepare for whatever his children might require. Louis remained asleep, but Charlotte and George would need careful management through the remaining time. He caught Catherine's eye again, this time conveying his assessment of the situation. She nodded almost imperceptibly, indicating her agreement and readiness. The ceremony moved into a section requiring audience response, everyone reciting words printed in the programs. Catherine helped Charlotte find the correct page, then read softly alongside her daughter, pointing to each line so Charlotte could follow. George read independently, his young voice joining the massive chorus that filled the abbey. The boy's determination to participate fully, despite his obvious fatigue, demonstrated a commitment to duty already taking root, as the recitation concluded. Charlotte leaned more heavily against her mother, and Catherine made a quick decision. She shifted slightly, creating a more comfortable position where Charlotte could rest while still maintaining appropriate posture for the setting. The adjustment was so natural, so practiced that it seemed effortless. Yet it represented years of experience finding ways to support her children through demanding public appearances. Louis stirred briefly, his small face scrunching before relaxing again into deeper sleep. William adjusted his hold automatically, ensuring his son remained comfortable. The fact that Louis could sleep so peacefully despite the music, the voices, and the overall activity spoke to the complete security he felt in his father's arms. Nothing could disturb him when he was held so safely. George's attention began to wander, his eyes moving from the ceremony to examine the abbey's incredible architecture. Catherine noticed, and rather than redirecting him back to the service, she allowed this brief mental break. Sometimes, maintaining focus required periods of rest. Even if that rest took the form of examining soaring columns and ancient stonework, another hymn began. This one familiar enough that many people sang without needing their programs. William's voice joined in, deep and steady. While still supporting Louis, Catherine sang to her arm around Charlotte, including her daughter in the music even though the girl was too tired to sing herself. George mouthed the words, participating in his own way. The ceremony entered a particularly solemn section, a moment of silence observed by everyone in the abbey. In that profound quiet, the only sound was the natural rustling of hundreds of people trying to remain still. Charlotte shifted slightly, and Catherine's hand pressed gently against her back, a reminder to stay calm. George sat frozen, understanding the importance of this moment. Louis, still sleeping, made a small sound, drawing a few smiles from those seated nearby. Even the most formal ceremony couldn't completely suppress the natural behavior of a tired child. And somehow that made everything more human and relatable. William tucked Louis closer, ready to soothe him if he woke. But the boy settled immediately, turning to his peaceful rest. As the silence ended and the ceremony resumed, Catherine took stock of her family. George exhausted but enduring. Charlotte, resting against her side, fighting to stay present. Louis surrendered to sleep in his father's arms. William, steady and strong, shouldering both literal and figurative weight. They had made it this far together. They would make it through whatever remained. A final reading began, the speaker's voice measured and clear. The words spoke of hope, future, and the passing of tradition from one generation to the next. Watching this young family, their unity evident despite the challenges of the moment, those words took on deeper meaning. Here was the future, quite literally. Learning to carry forward traditions while also transforming them with fresh humanity. George's posture slumped noticeably now, exhaustion winning its battle against determined effort. Yet he remained in his seat, still participating, still present. His resilience, learned from parents who demonstrated it daily, carried him through when his young body wanted to rebel. Catherine reached across, giving his hand a quick squeeze of pride and encouragement. The ceremony moved toward its conclusion, though neither the children nor most of the congregation knew exactly how much remained. Catherine and William, experienced in these matters, recognized the signs that the end approached. They prepared themselves and their children for the final push, knowing that soon they would be able to retreat to privacy and let the children finally relax completely. The final blessing echoed through Westminster Abbey with particular resonance, the words carrying centuries of tradition and hope for the future. Catherine felt Charlotte perk up slightly beside her, the little girl sensing somehow that the end approached. George straightened his spine once more, determined to finish strong despite the fatigue that weighed on his small frame. William gently roused Louis, knowing the boy would need to be awake for their exit. Louis blinked slowly, confused for a moment about where he was, then relaxed as he recognized his father's face. The prince whispered softly to his youngest son, preparing him for what came next. Louis nodded sleepily, still too tired to fully engage, but trusting his father completely. The final hymn began, a triumphant piece that lifted spirits throughout the congregation. People rose to their feet, energy returning after the long ceremony. The family stood together, Catherine helping Charlotte up, while William settled Louis on his hip. George rose independently, standing tall, despite the weariness visible in every line of his body. As the music swelled, filling every corner of the magnificent space, Catherine caught William's eye. They had done it. Their children had made it through with grace and dignity intact. Yes, there had been moments of struggle, times when the challenge seemed almost too much. But they had supported each other, adapted to needs as they arose, and demonstrated that being royal didn't require sacrificing being human, the hymn concluded. And the moment came for the family to begin their exit procession. This walk would be shorter than their entrance, but it still required energy and focus from children who had already given everything they had. Catherine squeezed Charlotte's hand, communicating encouragement and pride. George took his position, ready to fulfill his role one more time. The family began moving. Processing back down the aisle they had walked earlier, the congregation remained standing, watching their departure with expressions ranging from admiration to genuine affection. These weren't just distant royals performing duty. These were real people, a real family, navigating extraordinary circumstances together. Charlotte walked more confidently now, perhaps energized by the knowledge that they were leaving, that rest and privacy waited beyond those massive doors. She no longer needed to lean on her mother, though Catherine's hand remained available. The little girl had found reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Inspired by her parents' steady example, George maintained his careful pace, his young face set with determination. He had learned something today about himself, about his capacity to endure difficulty when supported by family. The lesson would serve him well in the years ahead, as he grew into responsibilities he had been born to carry. But for now, he was simply a tired boy making his way toward rest. William carried Louis with easy strength, the boy more alert now, but still content to let his father handle the walking. Louis watched the people they passed with renewed interest, waving occasionally to someone who caught his eye. The spontaneous gestures drew smiles throughout the abbey, reminders that royal children were still children. With a child's natural friendliness, halfway down the aisle, something remarkable happened. The congregation, moved by what they had witnessed, began to applaud. It started with a few people, then spread like ripples across water until the entire abbey rang with appreciation. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't planned. This was genuine acknowledgement of something special they had witnessed. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected response. The applause wasn't for ceremony or tradition. It was for family, for love, for the grace with which this mother and father had guided their children through a challenging experience. She glanced at William, seeing her own emotion reflected in his expression. George looked surprised by the applause, unsure how to respond. William leaned down slightly, whispering something that made his son's face light up with understanding. George straightened further, acknowledging the applause with a small nod that somehow combined childish pride with emerging princely dignity. Charlotte pressed closer to her mother, overwhelmed by the sudden noise and attention. Catherine immediately provided shelter, her body language shifting to protect while still moving forward. She whispered reassurances, helping her daughter understand that the applause was celebration, not something to fear. Charlotte relaxed slightly, managing a small smile toward those they passed. The family continued their exit, the applause following them like a benediction. Louis, delighted by the noise, clapped his small hands together in response, making people laugh and applaud even harder. His innocent joy broke through remaining formality, reminding everyone that beneath all the ceremony and tradition, this was simply a family-deserving celebration as they neared the exit. Catherine took a moment to look back at the scene they were leaving. The magnificent abbey, filled with light and music and hundreds of people still applauding. The moment felt surreal, like something from a dream, yet it was entirely real, a memory that would stay with her forever. William guided them through the final section, his experience showing in the smooth way he navigated the last protocols and courtesies. Officials bowed as they passed, some with genuine warmth in their expressions beyond mere formality. The family's performance today had touched something in people, reminded them why monarchy could still matter in modern times. George's steps had grown heavier, each one requiring visible effort now that the end was so close. But he persevered, refusing to stumble or falter. Charlotte leaned more heavily on her mother again, her brief burst of energy fading. Louis rested his head on William's shoulder, content to be carried the rest of the way. The massive doors approached, promising privacy and rest beyond. The family could see daylight streaming through, could hear the muffled sounds of crowds outside still waiting to catch a glimpse. They had one more gauntlet to run, one more moment of public visibility before they could truly relax. Catherine straightened her shoulders, preparing for that final push. She helped Charlotte do the same, knowing her daughter would need to find strength for just a few minutes more. George sensed his parents' shift in energy and rallied himself, ready to face whatever came next. William adjusted his hold on Louis, ensuring his youngest would be comfortable through this last public moment. They reached the threshold, pausing briefly as protocol required. The applause from inside the abbey still echoed behind them, a remarkable send-off that none of them had anticipated. Catherine looked at her family, at these three incredible children who had shown such courage and grace, at her husband who had been their rock throughout. Together, they stepped through the doors and back into sunlight, ready to complete this journey the same way they had begun it, as a family, united in love and mutual support. Facing the world together with grace and dignity that came not from titles or training, but from genuine connection to each other. The crowds outside erupted in cheers as the family emerged, but that was a challenge for another moment. For now, as they crossed that threshold, they had earned a brief second of private triumph. They had done it. Together, they had accomplished something remarkable, and nobody could ever take that away from them. The roar of the crowd outside Westminster Abbey washed over the family like a physical force. Thousands of voices joined together in celebration, the sound carrying both joy and genuine affection. Catherine instinctively drew Charlotte closer, while William shifted Louis in his arms, ensuring his youngest son wouldn't be startled by the sudden noise. The family paused at the top of the Abbey steps, allowing the crowd their moment of connection. This was part of the unspoken contract between royals and public. The people waited for hours to see them, and in return, the family gave them these brief moments of visibility and acknowledgement. George stood between his parents, blinking in the bright sunlight after the Abbey's dimmer interior. Cameras clicked in a constant rhythm, thousands of phones and professional equipment capturing this moment from every possible angle. The images would be analyzed endlessly, shared millions of times, frozen in digital permanence. But for the family themselves, this was simply the next step in a long day. Another challenge to navigate together. Catherine felt Charlotte trembling slightly and looked down to see her daughter overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of attention. She knelt quickly, bringing herself to Charlotte's eye level, blocking out the crowd with her own body. Whatever she said remained private for Charlotte alone, but it worked its magic. The little girl's face transformed from uncertainty to cautious confidence. William noticed Catherine's intervention and smoothly shifted position, creating additional shelter for the private mother-daughter moment. George, taking his cue from his father, stood a bit taller, unconsciously helping to shield his sister while she regained her composure. The family's protective instincts for each other played out in these small gestures, invisible to most but deeply meaningful. As Catherine rose, she and William exchanged a look that communicated volumes. They were almost done. Just this brief public appearance, the short walk to their vehicle, and then privacy. Their children had already exceeded every expectation. Whatever happened now, they had already succeeded beyond measure. The family began descending the Abbey steps, moving slowly enough for photographs, but quickly enough to show consideration for their tired children. Security personnel surrounded them at a respectful distance, creating a buffer between the family and the pressing crowds. The noise remained deafening, people calling out names. Expressing love and support, George managed a small wave toward the crowd, a gesture he had practiced but which still came out charmingly awkward. The crowd responded with increased cheering, delighted by this acknowledgement from the young prince. Charlotte, emboldened by her brother's action, offered a tiny wave of her own, her small hand barely visible as she moved it back and forth. Louis, now fully awake and energized by the excitement, waved enthusiastically at everyone and no one, his small face split by a huge smile. His uninhibited joy proved infectious, drawing laughter and increased cheering from the crowd. Here was a child who hadn't yet learned self-consciousness, who simply responded to positive energy with his own happiness. Catherine noticed several children in the front row of barriers, some barely older than Charlotte. She made a subtle adjustment to their path, bringing the family closer to that section, allowing those young admirers a better view. It cost them 30 extra seconds, but the delight on those children's faces made it worthwhile. George noticed where his mother had steered them, and added his own wave toward the young spectators. William remained the family's anchor, steady and calm throughout the continued attention. He nodded acknowledgement to various sections of the crowd, his movements economical but warm. Louis squirmed in his arms, wanting to see everything at once, and William adjusted his hold with practiced ease. Never letting his youngest feel restricted while still keeping him secure, the family reached the bottom of the steps, approaching the waiting vehicles that would finally provide privacy and rest. But they weren't quite finished yet. A small group of dignitaries waited for brief, final acknowledgments, and protocol required these last courtesies. Catherine and William handled these exchanges with professional grace. Even as they felt their children's energy finally beginning to fail completely, George swayed slightly on his feet, exhaustion finally overwhelming determination. William noticed immediately and placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder, providing support while still allowing the boy his dignity. George straightened, drawing on reserves he didn't know he possessed. Making it through these final moments through sheer force of will, Charlotte had gone very quiet, a sign Catherine recognized as the calm before potential emotional storms. She kept her daughter close, ready to provide whatever support might be needed. The little girl held on, her small face set with concentration. Determined not to break down in public no matter how tired she felt, the final dignitary stepped back with a bow, and suddenly they were free to move toward their vehicle. The family covered the last few steps with relief evident in their bearing. The car doors opened, promising sanctuary. Catherine helped Charlotte in first, following immediately after. William handed Louis to Catherine, then helped George before entering himself. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise and attention, the transformation was immediate. George slumped against his father, all pretense of energy abandoned. Charlotte curled against her mother, finally allowing tears of exhaustion to fall. Louis, confused by his sibling's sudden change, looked to his parents for guidance. William wrapped his arm around George, pressing a kiss to his son's head. His voice, when he spoke, carried pride and love so deep it seemed to fill the vehicle's interior. He told George how incredibly proud he was, how amazed by his son's strength and grace. George, too tired for words, simply nodded against his father's chest. Catherine held Charlotte close, wiping away tears with gentle thumbs, whispering reassurances and praise. She acknowledged how hard it had been, validated her daughter's feelings, celebrated her courage. Charlotte's tears slowed, then stopped, replaced by a tired but satisfied smile. She had done it. She had made it through. As their vehicle pulled away from Westminster Abbey, the family sat together in comfortable silence. The crowds outside still cheered, still waved, but inside the car was peace. Louis, no longer overwhelmed by attention, chattered happily about what he had seen. George listened with half-closed eyes. Charlotte remained nestled against her mother's side. William and Catherine exchanged a long look over their children's heads. No words were necessary. They had guided their family through something extraordinary, had shown the world what modern royalty could be. They had balanced duty with love, tradition with humanity, public service with private devotion. The city passed by the windows as they headed home. Behind them, Westminster Abbey stood magnificent and ancient, witness to another chapter in its long history. The ceremony would be discussed and analyzed for days to come. Images would circulate globally. Commentary would flow endlessly, but for the family themselves, what mattered most was already accomplished. They had faced a challenge together and emerged stronger. They had supported each other through difficulty and celebrated each other's successes. They had shown their children that being royal meant service, yes, but it also meant family. It meant never facing challenges alone. It meant grace, unity, and love that transcended any crown or title. George had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder. Charlotte dozed against her mother. Louis, still the most energetic, played quietly with a toy someone had given him. Catherine and William sat in peaceful silence, their children safe and close, heading toward home and the privacy they all desperately needed. Today, they'd given the world a gift, the sight of a real family navigating extraordinary circumstances with genuine love and unity. Tomorrow, they would be parents again, facing the regular challenges of raising 3 young children. But for this moment, traveling through London in the aftermath of their public appearance, they were simply grateful. Grateful for each other, for their children's resilience. For the privilege of facing life's challenges together, the vehicle turned toward home, carrying a tired but triumphant family toward rest, privacy, and the simple joys of being together without cameras or crowds or ceremony. Behind them, Westminster Abbey kept its own council, adding this day to its long memory of history, tradition, and the timeless power of family bonds that transcend even the grandest settings.